After the grand success of Resident Evil 2 in establishing for Capcom another solid series, Capcom had robust plans to greatly expand upon the series. In this case, not 1, not 2, nor 3, but 4 new Resident Evil games being simultaneously developed. A prequel called Resident Evil 0 for Nintendo 64, and a side entry for the next generation Dreamcast console called Code Veronica. But on the PlayStation, 2 major entries were being planned, one being a simple, cheaper side story that was to happen concurrently with the story of Resident Evil 2 called Resident Evil 1.9/2.1. The other, however, being made by the now acclaimed director of Resident Evil 2, Hideki Kamiya, as the official sequel called Resident Evil 3. Bringing back much of the staff from that successful second game in late 1997, including professional writer Noboru Sugimura to write another grand venture in this zombie apocalypse. The story this time taking a note from the second game's extra scenario, The Fourth Survivor, where one would play as Hunk, who on his way back via a cruise ship to Umbrella with the G-Virus on hand, gets caught up in another viral outbreak, with plans to even have the T-Virus mixed with plant DNA to make a new alternative to the general zombie creature. However, by mid-1998, the PlayStation 2 was officially announced, and Capcom executives were now concerned with the idea of releasing the official sequel so close to the end of the PlayStation's life cycle in fear of low sales. And so Capcom tasked studio manager Shinji Mikami to take the team over to making the next Resident Evil game for the next generation console instead, whereby they decide to scrap the idea and start over with a fresh new take. But now what was left on the PlayStation was Resident Evil 1.9/2.1, a game set to star a character that would attempt a desperate escape from the viral outbreak of Raccoon City, a game that would end up becoming the grand true sequel. From much evolution, changes in concept, and executive meddling that nearly forced its grandest member out, to a horde of cut ideas. And so today, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Resident Evil 3. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, to further support us and keep creating new videos. With a smaller budget in mind, the development of Resident Evil 1.9/2.1 began in October 1998 under the watch of producer and series creator Shinji Mikami. With Kamiya now too busy with his own Resident Evil sequel, a new director was needed. Much as how Kamiya rose from his days of being just an event planner on Resident Evil 1, Kazuhiro Aoyama was also gaining prominence, having just recently directed the ever-popular side story The Fourth Survivor of Resident Evil 2. Mikami as such assigned him as the director of this entire side game. Being that this was a side game, Mikami's idea was to make it play differently from Resident Evil 2. Unlike previous games where enemies already were set on screen to be seen, avoided, or fought, enemies would suddenly appear from off-screen to further the fear on the player. All this being done in an explorable Raccoon City, something Resident Evil 2 didn't do, as that was a game that, while it took place in the city, was isolated to only a few enclosed locations, while this would be going through large stretches of the city, actually seeing and feeling Raccoon City. But the biggest idea here was what was contributing to the title of 1.9/2.1, a short time skip. The game was set to take place very shortly before Resident Evil 2, but at one point the protagonist would go unconscious, where when they wake up, it is now taking place after Resident Evil 2. Hence, it was both a prequel and a sequel in essence, something that was catching supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto's attention. And so, being that it was a story that was essentially just an expansion on Resident Evil 2's story, it didn't need to reinvent locations nor the cast altogether as 2 did. Much as how Kamiya was too busy to direct this game, so was writer Noboru Sugimura with Kamiya's very game. Initially, with Resident Evil 1's writer Kenichi Iwao having resigned in 1998, the position had stayed vacant. As a result, a new writer was hired in place by the name of Yasuhisa Kawamura. Kawamura already had somewhat of a name as a writer, being the assistant on the manga Battle Angel Alita, and later even doing the novelization of it. And so, coming to Capcom, he began working on the writing team for Dino Crisis, another game that Shinji Mikami was producing. and so with Mikami's familiarity with Kawamura, he was now brought on to write Resident Evil 1.9/2.1. To familiarize himself with the series, Kawamura, as such, spent time playing the previous entries, and so Kawamura began writing by taking these ideas of the short time skips surrounding Resident Evil 2, crafting a story that would explore several ideas already introduced via 2, including further expansion on the internal structure of the Umbrella Pharmaceutical Company, including conflicts between the European and American branches. These, along with taking several ideas from the Resident Evil radio play called the Biohazard Drama, which was released in 3 volumes that expanded upon the lore of Resident Evil 2 and written by its very writer Noboru Sugimura. These ideas included the Raccoon General Hospital working to develop a vaccine for the T-virus, the virus initially spreading via drinking water, and the zombies being buried despite not actually being dead. The protagonist was said to be a new protagonist altogether, fitting of the previous entries as they all introduced new characters too. All this going on while the ultimate plan was for the destruction of Raccoon City itself. This once again was an idea pulled from the radio drama called The Little Runaway Sherry, where the city would be destroyed by napalm, but Kawamura wanted to depict it in a very climatic finish, showcasing the horrifying death of 100,000 people by an even stronger thermobaric bomb. Even with that slight change on its destruction, it was clear that Kawamura was staying very faithful to the story that Sugimura and the sub-company Flagship had developed, to the point of scripts being sent in for review too. While production was going well, soon however, everything was about to change. Supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto, who was virtually overseeing several Resident Evil games in development, had taken note that Kamiya's Resident Evil 3 was going to take some time to learn the hardware and build a proper sequel on the PlayStation 2, and knew that they couldn't keep the series dormant between entries for that long, as fans may lose interest. As such, Okamoto made the decision that Kamiya's PS2 Resident Evil game was to instead become Resident Evil 4, while Resident Evil 1.9/2.1 would become the official sequel, Resident Evil 3. With the game being promoted to the true sequel status, changes were to be made, as this was a main entry now. The new idea of enemies suddenly appearing and scaring players was to be scrapped, and to play more like previous entries where enemies were already stationary, a means to make it more familiar to the fans. But on top of that, the schedule was cut by 2 months to give it a bigger gap between its release and the PlayStation 2 to alleviate the Capcom executives' worries. This way, Okamoto felt that the game can still sell 1 million copies without hurting the series. Mikami, however, was not happy, seeing executives suddenly jump at this small side project and change everything around it. He just had enough. And so Shinji Mikami, the creator and one of the greatest creatives at the company, quit Capcom. For only a moment, as he soon redacted the decision and came back. Of course, Okamoto wasn't going to let the team suffer with these changes. As a result, the team size doubled from 20 to over 40 members now. And so to add to this familiarity, both Mikami and Aoyama decide to swap the unnamed protagonist out for a familiar character, Jill Valentine of Resident Evil 1. Up to this point, Jill was already being planned as the protagonist of the other side game, Code Veronica, but with Jill being used here now, she was replaced there with Claire Redfield instead, while Chris was too integral to Code Veronica's story to be considered for this game, thus Jill was the only real option. Simultaneously, Mikami sought to create a villain that brought about a constant state of paranoia, in a bid to further call back to Jill's ventures in Resident Evil 1, and the STARS members destroying Umbrella's BOW tyrant. Umbrella Europe would send a creature that would specifically go in and hunt these very STARS members in a constant pursuit, thus taking inspiration from the T-1000 from 1991's Terminator 2. Kawamura crafted the Nemesis T-type, or simply just Nemesis. According to Mikami, I wanted to introduce a new kind of fear into this game, a persistent feeling of paranoia. The Nemesis brings that on in spades. When it disappears after the first confrontation, you live in constant dread of the next attack. The idea is to make you feel like you're being stalked, while at the same time, Jill works and deals with members of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, who are a private military force of Umbrella set to rescue civilians during the outbreak. Kawamura had several subplots arranged around them, but was dropped. One member, however, does become the co-star with Jill. When the cast was being made in-game, the UBCS mercenary that was to star with Jill was designed with a darker skin tone and hadn't been given a specific name just yet, which led to Kawamura giving him more of a Latino origin and thus the name of Carlos Oliveira. And as development proceeded, it was now given the title of Resident Evil 3: Last Escape, in reference to Jill's desperate attempt to escape the burning Raccoon City. Utilizing the same engine from Resident Evil 2, the traditional pre-rendered backgrounds were kept. The reasons, as usual, were for the amount of polygons that could be saved on screen to be better used for enemies, which now were able to have up to 9 on screen at once, and with better AI to chase Jill through stairs even, let alone increasing their variety by having civilians appear as zombies too. Many ideas were being finalized, some ideas even considered but scrapped entirely, such as the idea of having you control a zombified Brad Wickers in the game, but with how low the funding was, they decided to scrap that idea. They even considered bringing back old enemies like the Chimera and Neptune from Resident Evil 1, but even an enemy that they were freshly making for this game that never got beyond the concept stages, which was called the Wildcat Zombie, and was to appear at the Raccoon Park. And so, to test the maps of the game, the character Tofu from Resident Evil 2's Tofu Survivor returned, and was being used to test the collision of the game, as he had done in the previous entry as well. As always, the pre-rendered backgrounds were being made with simple polygons at first, before given the finalized and detailed designs, with many changes on top too, including object placements and camera angle shifting, such as with this clock tower location. This along with several early models seen here of Jill, Carlos, and Nemesis here too. Meanwhile, as per usual, several pre-renders were made that never were even used, such as an unused camera angle for the streets, 2 unused camera angles for the clock tower lobby, and an early version of the locker in the Dead Factory, as well as 4 for a building exterior that looks to even involve a truck where its door would open and close, as well as a red box that looks to have held a chained shotgun, based on this remaining graphic that likely would have loosened once solving a puzzle. Another being an unused version of the parking lot save room that features a save room totally destroyed. This likely would have been intended for when the Gravedigger boss appears. Meanwhile, being that this was an expansion on what Resident Evil 2 started, it only made sense to revisit some of the game's iconic locations, such as the police station. While many pre-renders were reused from that game for this, some did change to prevent certain areas from being explored, such as the corridor leading into the STAR's office, being boarded up now, which originally in fact the pre-rendered for that was boarded up differently. Even some new ones were crafted, but not used, such as the close-up of this desk in the meeting room, which was to have handgun ammo, but never used. Which along with these, the game's large assortment of items were being prepared too, with several that never made it in or were changed for the final game, including these 3 demon coins, which likely were for a puzzle, possibly an early version of the amber, obsidian, and crystal balls for the clock tower puzzle. Another being the fire hose, which unlike the final version, it was to come in 2 pieces that one finds and combines to make the final one, likely removed to lessen the backtracking. This goes same for the remote control, which wasn't an item in the final game, but was to be an item originally, whereby one combines the batteries with it to use. Some items, however, are more questionable, such as the Giga Oil, an item that has full 3D textures actually, related to the dining room of the clock tower, which likely was to be used in a puzzle to light the fireplace there, as well as these chains, which was likely to be used in a puzzle and found in this box that in the final game held handgun bullets in hard mode. This along with this keyring that never were used, but believed to be used for the second half of the game. Unlike Resident Evil 1 with its live action opening and Resident Evil 2 with its CGI FMV opening, this game was instead going to open with drawn images to tell the story that was going on so far before transitioning to the FMV opening. A major idea that Kawamura had for this opening sequence was of where Jill would have a nightmare of her shooting herself in the head, an idea that was shot down by director Aoyama for how much it disgusted him, and so came about a more grounded plan where it was to showcase what happened between Resident Evil 1 and 3. This would start out with the STAR team members returning from the mansion and lead into them arguing with Police Chief Irons to go after Umbrella, but to no avail. leading to the continued control of the city by Umbrella before the major outbreak happens and Jill's last escape was to begin. But soon that was changed, whereby the whole section of stars arguing with Police Chief Irons never made it in. So the images were changed to use real-life images with Jill's drawn image superimposed on top. At first they were using placeholder backgrounds before using ones that were more fitting for the final game, with even Umbrella's logo seen. Soon, Resident Evil 3 Last Escape was about to be shown off to the public for the first time at the March Tokyo Game Show in 1999. However, only a trailer was shown with a simple thematic booth around it to view it. But finally, it became playable at the May E3 1999 event, receiving a new subtitle for the West to give it a more threatening edge: Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And here people were finally able to play it, where during Fuse's coverage, it was marked as weird on why it was taking place before Resident Evil 2 despite being billed as a sequel, something not commonly known yet about the time skip that was to come. With the release date of fall 1999 approaching for both Japan and North American markets, the marketing for the game was to go into full force, as Mikami's other game, Dino Crisis, which had been concurrent development, just released in Japan and was deemed a success. The Western release of the game was to pack in a demo of Resident Evil 3 as well. This demo covered all the way up till Jill leaves the police station. That, along with plenty of magazine ads and TV commercials to showcase the upcoming Resident Evil game, let alone Japan also receiving a double soundtrack album of the game to further promote. At this point in North America, Capcom was working with a combined $20 million ad campaign on advertising not just Resident Evil 3 and Dino Crisis, but as well as the upcoming N64 version of Resident Evil 2. It was survival horror fever at the company. In fact, for the first 500,000 copies of the game, Capcom decided to return the favor for Dino Crisis in North America and also pack in a demo of that game with Resident Evil 3, building a further selling point for both games. And so Resident Evil 3 released on September 22nd, 1999 in Japan and November 11, 1999 in North America. As Supervisor Okamoto's initial aim was for the game to sell at least 1 million copies, it quickly did that by early October in Japan, while in North America it became November's top seller. Worldwide, it went on to sell a whopping 3.5 million copies, becoming a massive success and continuing the Resident Evil brand, while at the same time staying on course with the critics of scoring very solidly, GameSpot feeling that it was the most sophisticated Resident Evil game yet. However, it was criticized for the fact that they only let you control one character and one scenario, unlike the 2 characters and 4 scenarios of the previous game. Meanwhile, the star of the show, Nemesis, was highly praised by publications such as Computer and Video Games for the attention it brought in as a whole. As with the previous 2 entries, Resident Evil 3 had forged its own legacy, having seen ports to PC and Dreamcast, whereby it would receive higher quality models, resolution, and new costumes, with the Dreamcast version receiving its own blue casual costume, and the PC version a black casual one. Granted, the Dreamcast version wasn't as loved due to the higher quality models contrasting with the still low-res backgrounds, while the PC version being panned for not being optimized for keyboard and mouse controls. Soon after, with the Capcom 5 deal on the GameCube, along with Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 was also ported to that console, which had its own share of criticism for looking graphically outdated, yet charging a high retail price. And over time, the game continuously was ported to the PlayStation Network and soon getting a PC version obtainable via GOG that was to receive higher res graphics and models. But much like its predecessor, this too received a remake in 2020, one that saw a lot of mixed reception with how much was changed or removed, while still overall was seen positively. While Resident Evil 3 was a smashing success, the future of the Resident Evil series was heading into the next generation. Code Veronica was hot in development for the Dreamcast, now featuring Claire Redfield as its protagonist. Resident Evil 0, which was being made for the Nintendo 64, was now being moved to the GameCube. While the true sequel, Resident Evil 4, was about to go through serious development hell, I would say 2 major games come out of it, and several concepts that would be scrapped before making what may be the most iconic game in the franchise yet. And thank you for watching! Hit the subscribe button for more Resident Evil and other games gaming history and cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have preferred the game staying as a side entry instead. So everyone, thank you for watching!